Thank you that you agreed to meet with us. I have several questions before the meeting. First of all, what do you think, as an independent expert now, what could make this meeting more successful for Ukraine and for United States? Which step should make Ukraine, first of all?
Well, I think the key thing is going to be establishing an understanding between President Biden and President Zelenskyy that we're on the same side, that we are trying to do the same things together. We're strategic partners. We have to deal with challenges together. Too often, in my view, we end up talking past each other or having different expectations. The U.S. lecturing too much, the Ukrainians, expecting too much, perhaps. But I think if we actually talk and understand what our joint concerns, our mutual concerns and interests are, there's a lot that we can work on. As I look at the meeting coming up, I think Ukrainians have an expectation, reasonable expectation, that this should be about Ukraine's security. Ukraine is being attacked by Russia. They've taken territory. They've killed 13,000 people. They've displaced over 1.5 million people. And on top of that, we've had a number of other points of pressure. The Russian military buildup in April, the Russian near takeover of Belarus now, the big exercise that's going to be taking place, Zapad 21, just after this visit. So I think Ukraine has a reasonable expectation that the U.S. should speak to Ukraine's security concerns. At the same time, I think the United States is saying, look, Ukraine, you have still not done everything you need to do in terms of fighting corruption and improving the judiciary, implementing reforms. Okay, I think probably the government in Ukraine would agree with that as well. But it's not an alternative to dealing with the security issues. It all needs to happen. And I hope that the two leaders are able to talk about this and get a good understanding with each other that we are really on the same side of the table trying to deal with things together.
Today we all see the situation in Afghanistan, and it is clear that this main topic for media, for USA establishment, what Ukraine can do to be in the center of this attention, not to lose its role as some newsmaker, some place which is interesting for United States?
Well, first off, I think this is a terrible tragedy. It is very, very concerning to see the collapse in Afghanistan, the loss of life. Even just yesterday with the bombing, we had 170 people killed. And this is so sad for the people of Afghanistan who were building something, building a society, and now it's all coming apart again. I think Ukraine has done a great job in the circumstances of helping to evacuate people, helping bring them to Kyiv or onward using their aircraft, their soldiers. I was in Kyiv this week and saw a number of Afghan refugees there in the city, and had a couple of conversations with people who had been with them, helping them to get out. And I think Ukraine can feel very proud of the role that its soldiers played. And I also think that the contributions Ukraine has made to NATO operations over time have been important. This is still a crisis moment in the U.S. There's talk of more terrorist attacks. The U.S. is still planning to complete a withdrawal over the next 3 days. And I think we're going to see a deteriorating situation in Afghanistan and for the U.S. in the region, which is going to continue for some time now, sadly. That being the case, I think first off, continuing the humanitarian work that Ukraine has already been doing is important. But I hope that also both leaders are able to see that while Afghanistan is now a failure and it's really a catastrophe, Ukraine can be a success. Ukraine is a stronger country. It is more cohesive, a stronger identity. Ukrainians are willing to fight for their country. They are capable, and investment in Ukraine, and I don't mean just money, I mean political, moral investment, security investment in Ukraine is likely to be much more successful than we were in Afghanistan. And maybe that'll be a narrative that can come out of this meeting as well.
Russian media use this situation in Afghanistan to show United States in some unpleasant way. And they,
of course.
They try to show that Afghanistan is the same story as Ukraine, and the Ukrainian, they should be ready to some bad consequences of their contacts with United States. Of course, it sounds like a bad joke, but in your opinion, it is correctly to compare situation in Afghanistan and in Ukraine?
Not at all. There's nothing that makes them similar. Afghanistan is deeply divided internally, has a weak central government that was not able to maintain security and stability on its own. And you had an external set of actors, the United States and other countries, trying to help that government build a stronger society. We've now left Afghanistan, or are leaving Afghanistan. We're leaving a disaster behind. Ukraine is exactly the opposite. Ukraine is a cohesive country, a strong country. It has strong institutions and a government. It is maintaining security inside the country on its own. It's not dependent upon external assistance. And it is dealing not with fragmented society and civil war. It's dealing with external aggression. It's dealing with Russia's invasion and seizure of territory from Ukraine. There's not a single thing you can look at that makes these two parallel.
Before this meeting, media published information that the United States will get $60 million as a help to Ukraine. What do you think? Is it some ordinary things, or it is some just before meeting?
Yeah, I would call it a gesture. I think it is an effort to try to show some increased support. It's obviously not a large amount of money, but nonetheless, it is something, and I think it's a gesture of trying to show support and commitment for Ukraine. Of course, Russia says that about the United States. Everything that Russia says is intended to influence. It's not necessarily true in any way, but they say this in order to play on the psychology and the minds of their adversaries. They want Ukraine, they want Europe to think that the United States will not be there, will not support them. That's what they'll say. I think the reality is quite the opposite. The U.S. is a fully committed member of NATO, is committed to Ukraine in a broad way, not as an ally, but supporting Ukraine's security, supporting Ukraine's reform and transformation, and supporting Ukraine's aspirations to be part of Europe and NATO. And so I think one should not listen to what the Russians are saying. One should instead say, why are they saying it? Why are they saying it? They're saying it to cause us to doubt ourselves.
Mm-hmm. The situation with Nord Stream, we see the position of United States, we see position of Berlin, we know position of Ukraine. In this situation, could Ukraine expect at least to get some extra military support as a new kinds of weapons, maybe as javelins or something else to protect?
Well, that's exactly my view. I think we need to look at how to address Ukraine's security concerns, which are enhanced by Nord Stream 2 being completed as well. They feel that that gives Russia an opportunity to create a linkage with Germany that would prevent Germany from being more supportive of Ukraine on security if Russia increases its aggression. So I think we need to be thinking, what can we do to help Ukraine on the security side? And I see two things. I think one of them is, as you said, it's support for the military, security assistance, support for Ukraine's NATO aspirations, talking with Germany about what a realistic pathway is for Ukraine to achieve NATO membership. We promised it back in 2008 and nothing has happened. So how does Ukraine get on track? That's one area. And I think you will see in the course of this visit a reaffirmation of U.S. security assistance for Ukraine. The second thing I think that the U.S. could do is help Ukraine on energy security as well. Ukraine has the natural resources to be a net energy exporter. It shouldn't be in a position of dependency on Russian gas or oil or coal. Ukraine has the capacity to be a producer and to export from there, to have energy independence. That may take some help. That may take foreign investment, it may take loan guarantees, it may take technical assistance. That's also something where I think the U.S. and Germany should pledge to help Ukraine achieve that vision. That would also include, by the way, renewables and electricity in the long run. Climate change, obviously very important to both Germany and the U.S. But in the short run, I think it's going to be gas and oil development and export that will help Ukraine achieve a greater sense of security.
I had a conversation with some people from State Department, former officials, and some of them, they suggest that it could be a good idea if United States will be the member of Normandy format. Mm-hmm. Is it real?
Well, we have a couple of issues here. So, first off, we need to have the U.S. more engaged in whatever format. There needs to be someone appointed who has authority, who has responsibility, as I did when I did the job, for engaging with France, with Germany, with NATO, the OSCE, EU, Russia, Canada, UK, whomever, in order to address the conflict. Right now, there's a gap. And there has been for a couple of years now. I think it's important that the U.S. get more engaged in dealing with this. Second question then is, what's the format for that? The Normandy format is one that was created by France and Germany with Ukraine and Russia. I think if you were to ask anybody but Ukraine, they would not want to add the United States to the Normandy format. Russia would not want to, France would not want to. And I don't think that it's all that important, actually. I think the real issue here is changing Russia's calculation. Right now, Russia feels it can continue its aggression against Ukraine with relatively little cost or pushback. Not from France and Germany, not in the context of negotiations. So it'll continue. What the U.S. needs to do is play a leading diplomatic role, getting France, Germany, NATO, EU, UK, Canada, IMF, everybody on the same page to be pushing back on Russian aggression so that Russia sees that its situation is going to get worse. So it can't just continue as is and not pay much of a cost. Russia's situation will get worse the longer it continues the war. If we can change that calculation for Russia, then Russia may choose to at some point say, okay, let's negotiate a solution. The moment Russia wants to have a solution, it's there on the table. The Minsk documents provide a framework for that. The Ukrainian government is always willing to implement the agreement, to have peace in Ukraine. The current government, the Zelenskyy government, has taken a lot of steps to try to create an atmosphere that was more positive. Simply, Russia doesn't want it. And we have to get to that point of changing the Russian calculation. It's not a question of the format. It's a question of mobilizing the pressure on Russia so that they can see it's not worth it to them anymore.
In time of your presidency, you have strong contacts with your counterpart, Vladislav Surkov. Mm-hmm. And you have many conversations with him. Maybe you have some insights which points so important for Russia that Russia cannot do any concession for Ukraine. Which point are most important?
Right. Well, there are several that the Russians bring up, and some, as I said earlier, sometimes the Russians say things that are not true. They know they're not true. They know that you know they're not true. And they say them anyway because they want to distract in the conversation. And there was a lot of that. At the same time, sometimes they say things that I think they are serious about. And a few of those things in the context of Minsk agreements or restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity in the Donbas, I think that they don't want the Ukrainian security forces to take over the Donbas immediately. They want a transition period. They don't want the optics of Russia pulling out and Ukraine just marching in. So they want some transition period. We talked about how to do that, and we talked about whether an international peacekeeping force would be a transition mechanism to control security in the environment there for a period of time before the Ukrainian forces come in. And that's necessary because another thing that's important to Russia is demonstrating that there is some kind of political process. They say they want local elections, they say they want amnesty, they say they want a special status. All of that's in the Minsk agreements. But those things, even local elections, can't really take place under conditions of occupation. So you need some kind of transmission mechanism, which again pointed to a peacekeeping force. Another idea is, well, maybe it's not a military force, maybe it's a police force, maybe it's OSCE-led police, but some kind of transition. And then the third thing is that the Russians right now control the international border between Ukraine and Russia, and they don't want to give that up until the very last moment. And so that's also something where we would probably need to have an international presence, take up positions on the border, monitor and control the border before Russia agrees that at the last moment, part of the implementation of agreement, Ukrainian forces will control their side of the border again. So those are the things that Russia has consistently put out there. They're very hard conditions. They are, quite frankly, unfair to Ukraine because this is all Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine, Ukraine wants the people that live there to have a better life now. But as a way of getting there, if the objective is to succeed in the end, that the territory is restored, that Russian forces are removed, that the illegal militias are disarmed, that addressing some of those transition mechanisms will probably be necessary.
Do you see some difference between Surkov's approach and approach of Dmitry Kozak now in situation on Donbass, in peace negotiation, or the situation is the same?
Both of them work for President Putin. And it is Putin's decision whether to launch the war, whether to continue the war, whether to end the war. I don't think that anyone else has a say in that decision. It's really President Putin. Their styles are different. They're different people. That's natural. But the result is the continuation of the war. And I think that will continue until President Putin is convinced that it's not worth it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you for having me. And let me wish the best for the Ukrainian people in Donbass, both in the occupied territories and in the unoccupied territories. It's an incredibly painful thing that so many people have lost their lives or had their lives disrupted. And all we can want is peace and an opportunity for these people to rebuild their lives again. And the only way that can happen is when Russia chooses to end the war.
Thank you.